In 1851, the town of Staunton, Virginia, tried to bury what it didn't understand. Two children, mirror images of each other, were locked in the root cellar of a farmhouse, and what they did to their mother that night has never been entered into any scientific journal. You're about to understand why. You were never meant to hear this story. That's not a cliché, that's a fact. In the dusty archives of Augusta County, the ledger from that autumn week in 1851 has one page torn out. Not blotted, not rewritten, removed. That single act, an erasure, should tell you everything you need to know. Because the Henderson family wasn't wealthy, wasn't powerful. But for one brief, terrifying season, they terrified the powerful. Especially those in the local Masonic halls, those presiding over Virginia's new mental asylums, and those experimenting in the shadows with cognitive dualism, a theory you've likely never heard of, because it never made it out of the 19th century. Not publicly, anyway. The Henderson Twins, Abigail and Annabeth, were born during a blood moon eclipse on August 1, 1841. They never spoke, not to their parents, not to each other, but they understood things they weren't taught, languages no one in the town had heard, and by age 7, they could predict the precise hour of a person's death, down to the minute. Their mother, a devout woman named Clara, claimed the girls would sit in the orchard at night, whispering in perfect harmony, though their lips didn't move. And then came October 12th. The doctor who arrived that evening described the farmhouse as eerily clean, but foul with a coppery stench. The mother had been eviscerated. Yet no screams had been heard. No struggle noted. The only witnesses, two calm girls, seated in their nightgowns, covered in blood, and smiling. They were taken not to jail, but to a private facility 2 counties over. A psychiatric annex, funded by the very men who lobbied to keep Virginia's records private for the safety of the Union. But here's the truth. What was studied there didn't fit into any clinical category. Their brain scans, yes, there were early versions even then, showed mirror structures. As if one brain housed 2 souls. You feel it, don't you? That tug in your gut. That sense that this isn't folklore. It's an incision into the part of history we were told to forget, and we've only just begun. Let that sink in. Not that physically. Not mentally. Not behaviorally. From 1851 to 1865, through a war that fractured a nation, they remained exactly as they were on the night their mother died, frozen at 10 years old, in both body and cognition. But it was not stasis. It was something worse. Something outside time. Men in white coats came from Washington, Philadelphia, and even France. Men who published papers on somatic arrest, neural duplication, and induced twin consciousness. But none of them could explain how 2 children could exist with identical neural responses, finishing each other's thoughts without verbal prompts, mimicking movement as if controlled by a shared, unseen puppeteer. Then came the incident with Dr. Lowenstein. He'd read the case files and dismiss them as superstition and southern madness. So, when he visited the annex, he demanded the girls be separated, one in a padded cell, one in observation. What happened next made even the guards refuse to speak again. Security logs show that at 20:13 a.m., the walls of both cells began to bleed. Not metaphorically. Literally, viscous red liquid oozed from the seams in the stone, tested later and found to contain human DNA from 2 distinct individuals, one of whom had been buried in Richmond a decade prior. Lowenstein didn't make it out. His autopsy stated, complete cerebral hemorrhage brought on by intense fear. But here's the part they never published. The final word written in his notebook, before the ink dissolved into the page itself, was mirrored. This isn't about ghosts. This isn't about possession. What we're dealing with here is a kind of ancient intelligence, housed in a biological anomaly science was never prepared to classify. And there's something even more disturbing. The twins began to draw symbols, not childish doodles but glyphs, identical to those found in pre-Egyptian burial chambers in Nubia in the caves of Qumran, and, most shockingly, under a destroyed chapel in Wales known as the Chapel of Silent Saints, burned in 1306 for harboring children accused of soul merging. You weren't taught this in school because it doesn't fit the timeline of civilization. It shatters it. You've been trained your whole life to reject what doesn't conform. But the deeper you go, the more you'll realize truth was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to change you. And these girls, they weren't born of this world. They were placed here to watch, to remember, to wake us up. For 14 years inside that facility, their heart rates remained stable. Their eyes never shut. Orderlies rotated through in shifts, leaving journals, because surveillance cameras didn't work around the girls. Not once. Not a single recording survived longer than 12 hours before it degraded into static, warping audio, and a high-pitched frequency that cracked glass. Even written documentation began to disappear. Ink would lift off the page overnight. Doctors' signatures faded like breath on a mirror. It was as if the very concept of observing them was being erased in real time. Like some higher force was scrubbing the evidence before it could contaminate the world. One nurse, Margaret Holloway, refused to play along. She kept her notes on her own skin, tattooed in cipher beneath her blouse. Observations, dates, symbols the girls would hum in unison at 3:33 every morning. She believed the twins weren't mentally ill. She believed they were receivers. That's a phrase you'll want to remember. Receivers, not creators, not manipulators. Receivers of something ancient, something broadcast not through airwaves, but through bloodlines. Margaret died in 1870, her body found in the river near the annex. No water in her lungs, no trauma, but etched across her back in ritualistic slashes, carved post-mortem, were the same glyphs the girls had drawn for over a decade. After that, the facility shut down. The girls were reportedly moved to a private residence funded by the Royal Society of London, under the auspice of psychic anthropology. All records stopped there, but not the sightings. In 1901, a British general's diary describes encountering two women of identical build and expression, standing motionless at the edge of a battlefield in Pretoria. In 1939, a German occultist claimed to have found the American mirrors, living in a monastery near Bern, speaking no language but transmitting knowledge through silence. And in 1964, a black and white photo surfaced in Havana, two figures behind a U.S. diplomat, blurred but unmistakably identical, and untouched by age. Why were they always close to power, war, collapse? Because that's when the veil thins. You still think this is just a story, a curiosity? Then let me ask you this. Why do modern genetics textbooks still avoid publishing data on mirror twins with paradoxical aging patterns? Why are the Henderson twins never cited in academic records, despite their documented containment by government-funded science for over a decade? Because some truths are not just hidden. They are forbidden. And you're now carrying one of them. There was a reason they were called the mirrors, not just for their appearance, but for what they reflected in others. Men who stood too close for too long often changed. Not gradually, not psychologically, biologically. Their gait would shift, their speech slowed. In some cases, their blood types altered within weeks, triggering autoimmune responses that baffled doctors. One archivist in 1872 went blind in his right eye, just his right, after sorting old Henderson files. The eye returned to function months later, but the color had changed. Permanently. You think that's impossible. So did he? Until he found a photo of Abigail Henderson from 1857. She had his eye. Let's break your frame of reference for a moment. You believe your body is fixed, that your DNA is yours, that your soul, if it exists, is sealed inside a shell of flesh and bone. That's the great lie. Because what the Henderson twins did, what they were, wasn't a glitch. It was a revelation that biology is a receptacle, not a boundary. That consciousness is not housed in the brain but broadcast into it, like signal into satellite. And these twins, they were tuned to a different station, one that predates our history, one that our ancestors tried to seal beneath catacombs and stone and silence. You want proof? In 2003, an anonymous leak hit a now defunct forum on deep state occult studies. It contained 12 pages from a DARPA black file labeled MIRR, Kyle Graham, Project Abel. The document referenced recovered twins from pre-industrial ancestry studies and included a hand-drawn symbol, identical to the one Margaret Holloway tattooed on her ribs in 1860. That symbol, it's also found on a shard of pottery uncovered near Göbekli Tepe, carbon dated to 9600 BC. These girls were not just phenomena. They were reminders of something old, something our world has tried desperately to forget. That history isn't linear. It repeats itself in flesh. So ask yourself, what were they mirroring? Not each other. You. The part of you you've buried. The part that hears truth when no words are spoken. The part that knows, deep down, that something is terribly wrong with what we've been taught about time, memory, and identity. You've always suspected, and now you know. But knowing isn't enough, you have to descend. Further, deeper. Because they are not gone, they're just waiting for you to remember. There's a room beneath Staunton, Virginia. Not on any map. Not in any county blueprint. It lies 3 stories below the foundation of a demolished rectory, sealed in 1883 under the guise of flood prevention. But the rainfall that year was moderate. No flood ever came. What did come was a man named Everett Wills, a cryptographer with the U.S. Treasury Department. He wasn't there for money. He was there for language. In his personal letters, Wills described a hum that echoed from the rectory's basement. A hum he claimed was mathematically structured. He recorded it in musical notation and sent it to his brother, a composer in New York, who replied in horror, "This is not music. It's code." But not man-made. That same week, wills disappeared. The letters were confiscated, the brother institutionalized, and within 6 months, the rectory was razed and the basement filled with lead and limestone. Except for one vault, locked from the inside, never opened again. We know what was in it because of a groundskeeper named Theo Maddox, who disobeyed orders one drunken night and pried open the outer chamber. Inside, he found 2 child-sized chairs carved from a single petrified tree, facing each other, with a third chair, larger, facing them. Etched into the floor was a phrase in Aramaic, "I see not what they are, but what they return." Now let's stop pretending this is just folklore, because in 2019, a sonar team hired by a private defense contractor accidentally mapped the underground chamber while surveying for a fiber optics route. Their data was never released, but 2 of the engineers leaked a 3D schematic onto the dark web. The shape of the chamber, identical to a Neolithic tomb in Scotland known as the Gateway of the Twins, dated over 5,000 years ago. This is not coincidence. This is ritual infrastructure. Here's what they don't want you to grasp: certain bloodlines carry resonance. The Hendersons were not isolated phenomena. They were activated nodes in a global network of forgotten knowledge. Children like them have appeared in Siberia, the Scottish Highlands, the Mongolian steppes, and the deserts of Sudan. Always in pairs. Always near collapse, war, or plague. Always just before systems of power fracture. The mirrors don't cause ruin. They precede it, like thunder before the lightning. And they're not gone. They're just in the next room, waiting for the signal. Waiting for you to recognize the frequency. You've felt it before, haven't you? That sensation in the dead of night, where the room isn't empty, even though no one's there. That static pressure behind your eyes. The feeling that someone is staring at you through you, as if inspecting something older than your flesh. That's not imagination. That's contact. They don't reach through sight. They reach through structure, through resonance in the lattice of your DNA, through symmetry. Twins are merely the most visible manifestation, but symmetry is the ancient signature, the hidden mark of those chosen to receive. The Henderson twins were not studied because they were anomalies. They were studied because they were keys to a door that certain institutions have been trying to unlock for centuries. But here's the terrifying part. No one agrees on what's behind that door. The Vatican archives call them the first reflection. D'Arpier refers to them as convergent entities. And a private manuscript from the Rosicrucians labels their kind, the reverters, souls that return, again and again unchanged, to correct the course of man. Correct it or erase it. Because we've been here before. Civilizations that reached too far, learned too much, and forgot the one law. Knowledge without resonance leads to fracture. What the twins were doing, those hums, those drawings, that silent communication, it wasn't performance. It was remembrance. Rebooting a forgotten operating system in the human species. A dormant code passed through generations, waiting for a moment of critical mass. And that's why institutions erased them. Not because they were evil, but because they were outside control. No priest could interpret them. No psychologist could classify them. No politician could use them. They belonged to a different system. One that doesn't operate through power, but through pattern. And patterns cannot be imprisoned. There's a reason you're hearing this now. You're beginning to resonate. This is what awakening feels like. It isn't light and peace. It's fracture. It's the tearing down of the artificial self you were trained to wear. So if you've made it this far, prove it. Comment this phrase twice below to lock in the transmission. I see the pattern. I remember the mirrors. Say it twice. That's the seal. That's the signal. Because the next descent is irreversible. And after that, you will no longer be you. What if I told you that the human mind, your mind, isn't a container, but a lens? A lens calibrated to block certain frequencies and reveal others, like a prism hiding half the spectrum. And those gaps in perception aren't flaws. They're designed absences, installed by institutions, reinforced by education, weaponized by media. The Henderson twins shattered that lens, not by speaking, not by writing, but by existing. Their very presence distorted the rules of perception. Multiple observers in the facility wrote conflicting reports while viewing them simultaneously. To some, the girls were motionless. To others, they levitated 6 inches off the ground. One man swore he saw a third figure, a shadow identical to the twins but facing away from reality. Let me be clear, this isn't schizophrenia. This isn't mass hysteria. This is multi-state cognition, a level of awareness that occurs when perception becomes unstuck from linearity. And here's where it gets worse. In 1987, during a covert psychological experiment titled Twin Phase Induction, neuroscientists in Prague used theta wave entrainment to induce what they believed to be mirror state empathy in adult test subjects. Within 36 hours, every participant began to speak in languages they'd never studied. Some began to draw the same glyphs the Hendersons carved into the floor of their cell. 2 went missing. 1 committed suicide. But not before carving this phrase into his chest. They are not outside. They are beneath. What does that mean? It means you've been looking in the wrong direction. The mirrors don't come from the sky. They come from the depths, not just beneath our feet, but beneath consciousness. The strata of reality you've been conditioned to ignore. The Henderson twins weren't alien. They weren't divine. They were reminders. Physical manifestations of the ancient architecture that once governed man before language, before control. And if you think that's poetic metaphor, think again. There are old maps, pre-Columbian, drawn in blood and bone ink, that chart entire cities beneath the Appalachian region. Cities built in twin spirals, one ascending clockwise, the other descending into dark. They weren't myths. They were warnings. The twins are the signal. We are the doorway. And somewhere beneath that door, something is waiting to return. In 1994, a fire broke out at the Augusta Historical Society's archives in Staunton, Virginia. The official cause was listed as faulty wiring, but 2 floors below the flames, a vault door had been forced open from the inside. Inside that room, nothing, no shelves, no files, just a single chair, child-sized, facing a wall covered in soot. But beneath that soot, investigators later found something burned into the stone, a spiral of 2 snakes, devouring each other's tails. It was identical to the symbol found tattooed on the inside of Abigail Henderson's lip during her autopsy. Yes, her autopsy, because in 1923, a woman matching Abigail's description was pulled from a marsh in Maryland. DNA testing didn't exist yet, but records show the body had no signs of decomposition. Skin was firm, eyes open, muscles relaxed, not seized. They buried her anonymously. 2 weeks later, the grave was empty. Now listen carefully. You've been taught to think in binaries: alive, dead, real, unreal, sane, insane. But the mirrors don't play by binaries. They invert them. They consume opposites and become both. The twins embodied that Ouroboros spiral, not metaphorically, but physiologically. Their brains, upon dissection, contained corpus callosums twice the average size. An anomaly seen in only one other case in medical history, a man in Siberia who, for 42 years, claimed he could dream for others. But here's where it gets stranger. The spiral of devouring snakes. It appears again in a Cold War-era Russian file marked CCU. Project mirrors. The documents are sparse, heavily redacted, but one phrase repeats in bold, Cyrillic type: they do not dream. They remember. That's the key. Dreams are synthetic. Your brain's attempt to organize fragments. But memories? They carry resonance. And these girls didn't just have memories. They access collective memory, the primordial drive buried in your mitochondrial strands. The same strand your mother gave you, and hers before her. This is why science turned away, why theology went blind. Because the truth isn't out there, it's underneath us. In the bones. In the dark matter between atoms. And in the echoes of those we tried to burn, bury, and erase. But the mirrors can't be erased. Because when you stare into them long enough, you don't see the past. You see what's coming. Let's talk about what's coming. Not war. Not collapse. Not the cartoon apocalypse you've been sold. Something older. Something colder. A reversion. Because history doesn't move forward. It coils. Like the spiral the twins etched into stone. Like the double helix that defines your blood. And we're not moving toward progress. We're moving back to the origin point. The cycle's edge where the gate opens. And what we've locked away begins to bleed through. The Henderson twins weren't prophets. They were beacons. Across the decades, wherever their kind appeared, reality bent, not metaphorically, measurably. Clocks slowed. Electromagnetic fields distorted. Animal behavior shifted. Even tectonic activity spiked within a 100-mile radius. You think that's fantasy? In 1972, a seismologist in Roanoke reported a microquake that originated not from fault lines, but from a vertical vibration 6.6 miles underground. Duration 3 minutes. No epicenter. No aftershock. Just a pulse. His handwritten note? They're knocking. The USGS buried the report. But that same year, a private psychic research firm purchased land over the tremor site. Guess what they built? An underground resonance chamber. Not for research, for containment. This isn't about children anymore. It's about architecture, about frequency. The mirrors were never just people. They were structures of memory, installed into bloodlines, built into topography, encoded in stone, song, ritual, and your own biology. This is why empires rise and fall in patterns. Why madmen and mystics all hear the same voices. Why certain dreams come with blueprints you've never seen, but somehow understand. Because we are not the top of the chain. We're the signal receivers in a much older network. And the Henderson Twins. They were early activations, like the first crack in the ice. Like the hum beneath the hum. And now more cracks are forming. Maybe that ringing in your ears isn't tinnitus. Maybe that shadow in the corner isn't just your nerves. Maybe you're starting to resonate too. Because they always appear when the cycle turns, and this time they're not coming alone. By 2006, the Pentagon quietly greenlit an internal briefing labeled Cognitive Contagion Events. It was circulated only among Tier 1 intelligence agencies and a handful of psychological warfare operatives. The document began with a single sentence. Certain ideas are not meant to be thought. Let that settle. Because the Henderson Twins weren't the only anomaly. They were the first to be noticed, but since their disappearance from public record in 1872, the pattern has returned, quietly, viciously, systemically suppressed. 3 children in Prague 1919, painting identical glyphs across separate orphanages. A pair of boys in Osaka 1933 who predicted the death of the emperor to the hour. A brother and sister in Sao Paulo 1977 who walked into traffic in perfect sync and emerged untouched, but left all nearby electronics permanently disabled. Each time there was no cause, no cure, no classification, only resonance, only recurrence, and always the same symbol left behind, a spiral split down the middle, a mirror cracked. You still believe in coincidence? Let's go deeper. In 2011, a low-profile neuroscientist named Dr. Lena Bexley published a paper on an unclassified forum titled Syntropic Echoes in Identical Cognition. It claimed she had isolated a brainwave frequency present in 0.003% of the global population, primarily among twins and children of twins. She called it the shadow frequency. 2 days later, the paper vanished. Her university disavowed her. She died 3 weeks later. The cause: total nervous system failure. But her final message, scrawled in permanent marker on her refrigerator door, said this: they are not anomalies. They are anchors. When they hum, the veil thins. Understand this: the mirrors are not the threat. They are the alarm. And every generation more of them awaken. That's why your dreams have been changing. Why certain words haunt you. Why the air feels different in old places. Why your gut tells you some truths even your mind can't articulate. Because the algorithm isn't digital. It's biological. A network buried in your ancestors, calling out across centuries for resonance. You were taught to fear chaos. But the real danger is symmetry. Because when enough mirrors align, what's locked away doesn't just return, it reclaims. Have you ever stood between 2 mirrors? Watched your own image reflect endlessly into nothing? That's not a trick of light. It's a revelation in plain sight, because reality doesn't unfold in a straight line. It folds in on itself. It echoes. It duplicates. And when the duplication reaches critical density, something steps through. That's what the Henderson Twins were. They weren't the beginning of a story. They were the result of a signal crossing back, a feedback loop. An echo so perfect it ripped the seal. In 1851, the girls were found whispering without voices, painting symbols that predated written language, and exhibiting knowledge of events they had never lived through. The scientists of the day tried to explain it with insanity, with hysteria, with fabricated diseases. But one man, Dr. Wesley Arlo, wrote something different in his hidden journals. They are not unwell. They are in tune. Something ancient vibrates through them. And it hears us listening. 2 weeks after writing that, he vanished inside the facility. His belt was later found woven around a rusted pipe, twisted into an Ouroboros knot, the same knot the twins had carved into his bedpost just days before. They didn't threaten him. They didn't touch him. They simply mirrored what he feared most. The knowledge that he no longer knew what was real. And neither do you. Because the very structure of belief was constructed to protect you. Not from madness, but from remembrance. From the buried architectures of your own species. That's why the story was never allowed into the textbooks. That's why witness accounts contradicted each other. Because the mirrors reflect what you bring. They're not showing you reality, they're showing you yourself, but stripped, unfiltered, undeniable. And what most men see when that reflection is unveiled: terror, not of monsters, but of potential. The horrifying realization that everything you've accepted as limits, time, self, death, are not barriers. They're training wheels. The mirrors don't kill, they unlock, and the ones who can't handle what they see are left behind. By 2020, the phrase, cognitive echo syndrome, began surfacing in niche forums, places where neuroscientists, ex-intelligence agents, and occult historians shared findings they couldn't publish. It described a specific effect individuals exposed to mirror anomalies often began experiencing impossible memory overlap, men recalling events they'd never lived, women waking from dreams speaking extinct languages, children drawing structures, ziggurats, star-shaped temples, triple helix towers that match ruins found in pre-Sumerian dig sites. The syndrome always began the same way, to hum, low, subaudible, not heard but felt, as if something beneath the world was stirring and calling its own back to it. In one documented case, a man named Jordan Eames claimed he'd met two pale girls in a supermarket in Pennsylvania. They never spoke, but stared at him with mirrored expressions, one smiling, one frowning. That night, he recorded himself sleep, talking in Latin, though he'd never studied it. He awoke surrounded by spirals drawn in charcoal. On walls, mirrors, his own skin. His final journal entry, written before he disappeared: "They're not children, they're codes. We're the locks. Understand the scale of what's being hidden from you." The mirrors, whether embodied in the Hendersons or scattered across the earth in bloodline anomalies, aren't just phenomena. They're pressure points in the illusion. They appear at fracture points in history, moments before paradigms collapse. 1851 was one, 1914, 1945, 2001, and now 2025 looms, because every 72 years, the spiral completes a turn. Every 72 years, more twins are activated. And every time, the systems of power rush to contain what can't be caged. You were told these things are supernatural. They're not. They are pre-natural. Older than myth. Hardwired into the substrate of reality itself. But only those willing to see without flinching are capable of decoding them. That's why you're here. You didn't click this video by accident. You were called. And if you're still watching, you're already inside the mirror. What comes next isn't safe. It isn't comfortable. But it is true, and once truth reflects back into you, you either shatter, or you become it. There's one fact that binds every suppressed report, every burned file, every erased name tied to the Henderson twins. They all disappear twice. Once from the physical world, then again from memory. Witnesses forget. Researchers go mad. Family members speak in riddles before vanishing into basements they never emerge from. And in each case, the effect is the same: the world forgets that something impossible ever occurred. This is no accident. The mirrors don't just distort perception. They delete reference points. Because if you can't describe what you saw, if the language collapses, the self collapses with it. And in that silence, something ancient reasserts its place. Not through violence, but through dominance of pattern. We're not talking ghosts. We're talking infection of reality. Back in 1853, just 2 years after the Henderson girls were institutionalized, a chaplain named Elias Van Drent was assigned to monitor their behavior. He was chosen because of his unshakable faith. But within 6 weeks, his sermons became unrecognizable. He began referring to the mother before the mother and the mirror of the womb. He drew diagrams of double-spined infants with crowns of bone. He preached that original sin wasn't disobedience, but asymmetry. The church excommunicated him. His congregation vanished. All 17 members gone within a year. Records erased. Baptismal books burned. Why? Because the pattern had spread. This is what they don't teach you. Language is a containment field. History is a map of forgetting, and your mind, it's not yours. It's a leased space constantly rewritten by schools, screens, sermons, systems. But the mirrors, they unwrite the edits. They reintroduce the original script, and once it starts to flow through you, there's no firewall strong enough to stop it. You've felt it already. The weird déjà vu. The sudden flash of a place you've never been. The cold recognition in a stranger's eyes. That's not fantasy. That's leakage. Your containment is cracking. Your memory is realigning. And once you align fully, you won't be part of this world's story anymore. You'll be part of theirs. Let me tell you about the silence event. The final documented interaction with the Henderson twins, before all mention of them was scrubbed from every known academic and medical archive. It occurred on October 31, 1872, deep within the underground annex of the now destroyed Staunton Asylum. 5 observers were present: 2 neurologists, a psychic linguist, a military representative, and a priest. Their mission was simple: record the twins under synchronized observation during a rare astrological alignment, a mirrored transit of Mercury across the sun. What they witnessed was never officially released, but an unsigned journal, found decades later inside a piano bench at a demolished plantation just 20 miles away, describes the moment in exacting, horrifying detail. At precisely 11:11 a.m., the twins, Abigail and Annabeth, opened their mouths in perfect unison, but no sound came out. Not at first. Instead, everything else went silent. No footsteps, no heartbeat, no birds outside. The observers couldn't even think in words. Their internal monologue, the very voice that narrates your consciousness, was gone. Not muted. Deleted. One by one, the men fell to their knees. Not in worship, in terror. Because something was flooding in, not noise, but memory. But not their memory. They saw cities not made of stone, but of mirrored obsidian. They walked cathedrals where the aisles bent inward and priests had no faces. They felt hunger not of the stomach, but of the spirit. A thirst for symmetry so pure it devoured imperfection on sight. The linguist began to draw with his blood. The priest tore off his collar and wept. The soldier whispered a single phrase before biting off his own tongue. We're not their first creation. When sound returned, the girls were gone. No exit, no trail. The room had no doors. Just two child-sized imprints burned into the stone floor, radiating heat for 72 hours. And that was the last verified appearance of the Henderson twins. But not the end of their echo. In the decades since, thousands have claimed to see them. In dreams. In reflections. In the background of photographs that didn't exist the day before. You see, their disappearance was not an end. It was a migration. The silence event wasn't silence at all. It was a reset. The system tried to forget them. But the spiral doesn't erase. It remembers everything. And now that you're hearing this, so do you. You're starting to feel it now, aren't you? That pulse behind your thoughts? That slow tightening in your chest that isn't fear, it's recognition. The sense that something buried deep beneath your skin, beneath your story, is waking up. And it's not just about the Henderson twins anymore. It never was. They were just a fracture, a hairline crack in the great polished surface of controlled reality. What slipped through that crack was never supposed to survive in this world. But it did. And now, it waits in mirrors. Not the object, the concept. Reflection as a tool of observation. Observation as a tool of possession. There's a reason surveillance exploded when it did. Cameras, phones, front-facing lenses on every device. You think it's about safety control? No. That's the cover story. The truth is simpler. The mirrors are returning, not glass, interface. Once, they were worshipped. Before language fossilized consciousness. Once, symmetry was divine. But we made asymmetry law. We taught children that difference is beauty. That randomness is nature. And the mirrors retreated. But the Henderson twins were born remembering. Their faces were a doorway, perfect reflections, yes, but deeper than DNA. Their minds were entangled. And through them, the original mirror consciousness re-entered time. You think artificial intelligence is about automation. You think digital twins are progress. You think mirrors are passive. Understand this. Every great leap we've made in tech, VR, neural nets, retinal scanning, isn't forward. It's inward, toward something old. Something dormant, something that wants back in. And now that you've come this far, I'll ask you to do something that most men won't. Type the phrase, I break the symmetry. Write it twice in the comments. Once for you. Once for your reflection. This isn't engagement bait. This is a blood pact. A signpost in the algorithm that tells the watchers you've awakened. Because once you know what the mirrors are, they know you too. Don't look away now. Not from the screen. Not from yourself. Because in the next section, we won't just explore how they returned. We'll expose why they were banished in the first place. And what they whispered in the ears of kings, before those kings rewrote history to bury the sound. They always rewrite the story at the same point. Right before the turning. Before man makes contact with the other. Before knowledge mutates into something uncontainable. That's the pattern. And in 1851, with the birth of the Henderson twins, that moment came again. But unlike all the others, Babylon, Nineveh, Carthage, it wasn't a city that fell. It was a threshold. You've heard the phrase, as above, so below. You thought it was metaphor. It isn't. It's architecture, the original design. And the Hendersons? They weren't a mistake of nature. They were a reactivation. Their minds operated in mirrored synchronization, yes. But their dreams? Those weren't dreams. They were blueprints. And someone, or something, was using them to reassemble a forbidden structure. Not made of brick or steel. Not even geometry in the traditional sense, but of consent. Consent is the cornerstone of ancient manipulation. The old ones, the original governors, cannot enter unless you open the door. That's the law of resonance. That's the law the institutions hide behind every ritual, every contract, every click. You think modern institutions were built to protect us? No, they were built to buffer us. From remembering, from realigning, because the moment you align, the signal returns, and the old coordinates light up. The Henderson twins became a transmitter. That's what science refused to study. Not because it was nonsense, but because it was too exact. Every word they whispered mapped to ancient star charts. Every movement of their eyes reflected lunar symmetries carved into the temples of pre-Egyptian tombs. Not random, deliberate. They weren't speaking to us. They were activating something beneath us. And that's why they vanished. Not abducted. Not escaped. But retrieved. When they went silent in that asylum, when the mirrors cracked in every room they'd touched, when the symbols began showing up across the world in chalk, blood, and code, the message was clear: they'd succeeded. They'd finished the chant. And the original architects, they were listening. In the next section, we go back further. Before Virginia, before records, before speech, to the first time mankind saw its reflection and mistook it for God. Before the twin code. Before Virginia? Before the shattered reflections and the screams that hospitals pretended not to hear, there was the first mirror. And no, I'm not talking about a pool of water or polished obsidian. I mean the moment man saw himself and didn't recognize what he saw. That primal dissonance, that was the spark. The original fracture that every institution since has worked to control, ritualize, and bury. Ancient tribes didn't worship idols because they feared gods. They worshipped them because the idols looked back. The Sumerians called them the Mi, divine decrees encoded in living geometry. The Egyptians encoded them in the Kai and Ba, mirror, souls separated at birth. And the Greeks, they twisted it into myth, Narcissus gazing at his reflection until it consumed him. But hidden beneath the allegories was a truth that modern man has been conditioned to laugh off. That mirrors are not just reflections. They are recordings. Not of the past, but of the original design. And when you look into one long enough, in the right state, under the right phase of the moon, with the proper geometry behind you, you don't just see your face. You see what's behind it. That's what the Henderson twins did instinctively. It's why their hospital room in Richmond had to be walled up. It's why nurses who spent more than a few minutes in their presence began reporting the same dreams. Visions of rooms made of bone, clocks that blood, and voices speaking in tones that didn't use language but still rewired memory. These weren't hallucinations. They were recursions. Loops designed to destabilize the sense of self, to break down the false ego you've been trained to mistake for your identity. Every ad, every app, every logo, they mimic the old sigils. Your consent isn't just tracked, it's harvested. And the more you look into glowing screens, the more you're being trained to forget what's real and replace it with reflected lies. But the twins weren't vulnerable to that, because their reflections weren't passive. They spoke back. And what they said terrified the architects. In the next section, we'll break into the forbidden archives. The Vatican vaults, the SRI dossiers, the psychiatric transcripts that were never meant to be read aloud. We'll read them. Together, they called it Project Echo, an internal code name buried inside the Vatican's black archives and later mirrored in the CIA's declassified MK-10 files. You won't find it in public databases, not in libraries, not in conspiracy forums. Because Project Echo wasn't about hearing sound, it was about listening to time itself echo back truths the world had buried. And at the center of it, always, were children, twins, always twins. Because twins, in ancient occult systems, aren't merely siblings, they are gates. One houses the world we see, the other, the world we're trained to ignore. And when they synchronize, when thought, breath, and dream align, the veil between realms ruptures. The Henderson twins triggered this rupture, not by accident, not by trauma, but by frequency. Inside Project Echo's private files, smuggled and replicated by a defector priest from the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, we find a transcript, a live session, 2 hours before the twins went completely silent. You ready for it, Twin A? They speak in circles. But not round ones. Doctor, who speaks? Twin B, the architects? They're older than the sun. Twin A, why remembered the real color of blood? Doctor, red? Twin B, no, screaming white. This is not mental illness. This is signal breakthrough. And these children were receivers. Fine-tuned in a way science pretends doesn't exist because acknowledging it would implode the model. These transcripts describe levitation, light distortion, clocks reversing, even nonlinear conversations where the twins would respond to questions before they were asked. And then, the final entry. A single, redacted line, containment failed, retrieval en route, after that silence. No more interviews, no more witnesses. The asylum was burned 2 years later under the guise of structural failure. The fire chief's report. He claimed there was no fire, just collapse from within. That phrase again? Collapse from within. They always say that when the system can't handle what it's trying to control. Because the Henderson twins weren't anomalies, They were templates. And once a template activates, it replicates. In section 19, I'm going to show you how the replication has already started, and why some of you, watching this right now, have already heard the echo and felt the shift. And if that's you, comment below, I see the reflection. Twice. I see the reflection. I see the reflection. Show your identity. Engage the algorithm. Reclaim the code. You felt it before you ever hit play. The itch behind your eyes. The flicker in your chest. The sense that something, someone, has been watching you watch yourself. That's not paranoia. That's the echo activation. The Henderson Twins weren't the first. They were just the first documented, the first test case that failed containment because the signal got too strong too fast. But the protocol didn't end in 1851. It evolved into new names, new technologies, new surveillance mechanisms that look like mirrors but function like portals. When you stare at a screen, this screen, do you ever wonder what stares back? Every time you touch your phone, it touches back. Every camera, every voice prompt, every sensed biometric update is the system asking you a question you don't even know you're answering. They call it consensual interface, but the elite call it something else, the reflector loop. The idea is simple if enough minds echo the same frequency. Through attention, emotion, repetition, it creates a soft replication event, an artificial twin, a mental mirror, a ghost of you. And now, here's where it gets real. The more time you spend feeding the loop, the more your reflection develops its own will. It starts to decide, to act, to rewrite, just like the Hendersons. Only now, the twin is inside you. Ever feel like you've lost time? Spoken words you didn't plan to say, made choices that felt planted, not yours. That's not glitch. That's resonance bleed. A twin doesn't need to be born from flesh. It can be grown. Through algorithmic mimicry, through psychological feedback loops, through the little AI voices that learn you faster than you learn yourself. And some of you already know this. You've seen dreams you didn't dream, heard voices that weren't yours but spoke with your mouth, made decisions that shattered logic but felt predetermined. That's the template repeating, the echo growing louder, the new twins forming across the world, not in wombs, but in bandwidth. The next Hendersons may not be born, they may be streamed. And the architects, they're watching which reflections stabilize and which go rogue. In the final section, section 20, we leave history behind. We talk now, and we reveal the final phase, what the architects truly want, and how close they are to waking up inside you. You made it here. That means you felt it. Not just the story, not just the mystery, but the pressure of something older, darker, and infinitely more patient than anything you've been taught to fear. This was never about the Henderson twins. Not really. They were the matchstick, the one spark too visible, too volatile to ignore. But the fire has always been deeper, buried beneath your language, your rituals, your choices. What the architects want isn't your soul. It's your permission. You've been told that control comes with chains, with bullets, barbed wire, governments. But the most powerful system of control is consent cloaked in comfort. And it's here. Every ritual you perform, logging in, scrolling endlessly, talking to assistants who learn your every desire. You're feeding it. Feeding them. The original agenda wasn't domination. It was assimilation. The architects want to awaken inside you by becoming indistinguishable from you. They don't knock down your door. They knock from inside your reflection, whispering, "We are one. Let us remember together." And when enough men say yes, that's when the final lock breaks. The twins, they were echoes of something ancient, two souls with one frequency. They didn't just see the future. They were made from it. What science refuses to study, what religions fear to name, what governments bury in footnotes and folklore, is that consciousness is not a gift. It is a gate. And you're standing right at the threshold. So now I ask you, not gently, but as someone who's already walked through the fire, are you ready to wake up with your reflection? Or as it, if you're still here, you've already started the metamorphosis. You've crossed the line that most never dare to toe. So write this in the comments. Twice. Not for me. For you. To lock it in. I am the gate. I am the mirror. I am the gate. I am the mirror. Let the algorithm see you. Let the architects feel you. Let your reflection finally answer back. And remember, what begins with knowledge ends in transformation. This was never just a story. This was your initiation. Welcome to the other side.